LBR LBO Infrastructure Summit 2016.
Shankar, you were talking about freeing up land or giving free land for low middle income housing. You were talking also about rent subsidies. You were talking about allowing everybody to buy at market prices, but giving a targeted cash amount to the people who can't afford it. So you're not distorting the market in a way, but you're having a very targeted subsidy. Freeing up land and those options. What are the pros and the cons from a developing country point of view? Is giving free land an option for us? What's least market distorting?
What we need to do is, these are the models available elsewhere across the globe, and especially in this particular region. Most of these models are from countries like China, India, but it is not true that all models would apply good in Sri Lankan's context. So we need to look at what is the availability of land, existing land within the core Colombo area. How to unlock it. So unlocking land is very, very important, because still you can unlock a lot of lands, because in the morning session somebody was mentioning that still a lot of lands being owned by multiple departments. Can we bring all this land into one packet and bring it under one roof, maybe urban land authority or something like that, because a lot of countries are looking at accumulating or assembling this land and putting it under one roof. Probably that will lead to a lot of public-private partnerships. So all these lands, I mean, strategically you can select if the land parcel is so close to the CBD, and if it has got a more of a commercial viability, that can be used for more of commercial developments. If it is little inside, give a good connectivity, and it can be used for a development which is aiming towards the middle income and the lower income housing. And also it can be subsidized with a package of land parcels, one at the city center, one at little away from the city, and 3-4 land parcels can be clubbed together and given it to a private developer, who in turn can develop.
So not necessarily co-located, but
yeah, exactly. So those are the models available that can be looked at in the Colombo context.
Okay, and we'll come back to land again. Nayana, thank you for the patience.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. So let me just jump right in. I wanted to bring this discussion kind of back home, and also kind of pose a few questions and position this, because housing and how we deal with housing in a comprehensive way is something where we still have not converged on. It's something where we still have an ongoing debate, and I thought it would be refreshing to just kind of table that debate and kind of incite some views. So as I said yesterday, our urban settlements are clearly expanding, and this sprawl is out of control. This is the satellite image I referred to yesterday about where people live. But what's interesting is this pattern of development that is ribboning out from the core into the suburbs and the hinterland. And this is the nature of our sprawl. It's not really pretty, and this is problematic. It's not organized, it's not structured properly, and this is not really sustainable. The single-family detached house is still the dominant housing model in Sri Lanka. This is down High Level Road. The character of the housing, you see how we are eating in to our landscapes. This is Kotte a couple of years ago, and it's largely still the same. And you can take a picture of anywhere, any suburban area, and this is basically the pattern you'll see. And we obviously have a very, a thriving land subdivision and sale industry, and we're incrementally parceling out, most cities into 6 purchas and selling it off. And this this fragmentation of land is a serious problem when we're trying to get higher density development. We also need to think about what really is happening in our cities. The image on the right shows mapping of populations between the 2 census periods. What you see in blue is where the population is going down, and brown is where population is growing up. The section on the left is Kandy. So it's the same in most of our cities. People are getting priced out, people are moving to the burbs, and the cities are, gentrifying. And this is really the question for us that we need to ponder. What kind of future do we want? What kind of cities do we want? Do we want our cities to be poor-free zones? Or do we want our cities to be rich and diverse and cosmopolitan and places where we all live together? This is a social question to me, and how we need to deal with this. So I think a clear strategy on urban housing is required, and I think a lot of debate on this is required before we nail it down. But I think we need to rethink how we want to rehouse our growing urban population. I think some form of densification is on the cards. It has to be done. The question is, how dense do you want to go? You need to start looking at housing not just as providing a box, but really how do you use housing as part of an instrument, a larger instrument to uplift people's lives. It's kind of the first step in a much more holistic kind of look at improving people's lives. And also when you look particularly at vulnerable populations, how do you deal with this question? It's easy, country after country has failed in saying, okay, we don't want to look at poor people, let's put them in kind of nice high-rises, neatly tuck them away, and let everybody else live happily ever after. And it doesn't quite work that way, and it effectively backfires, and you need to go revisit it again. So we need to, in my view, I think we need to think very, very sharply about integration of our society versus segregation of our society. And if you really think about it, this segregation that we are seeing, this socioeconomic segregation, is a relatively recent phenomenon. If you and if you go to any of your ancestral villages, or even to the burbs of Colombo today, you will see wealthy people living amongst smaller enclaves of not so wealthy people. And it is this ecosystem that really is symbiotic. Those are the guys that work in your house, that drive your car, that fix your pipes. These are the guys we live among, and we need them. And I think the working class, the poor, are really the oil that makes cities run. And I don't think you can make a viable city by draining the oil out. I think you need to find a way to have them live with us and integrate them into this. And to do this, I think we need a synchronized approach across multiple government agencies to really put this agenda squarely on the table and deal with it head on. Obviously, we've got several current programs, which I'm sure you're all you've heard of in some capacity. There's the Urban Regeneration Program run by the UDA, which is the low-income housing program. We've got an accelerated program for middle-income housing, largely led by NHDA, which was just launched. That's targeting middle class, very much a market-driven program. And then you've got a whole bunch of housing development programs run by UDA, NHDA, USDA, NHDA, and a whole OVDC, and we'll hear about some of these. But basically, there's many models. And some of these models compete with other models. And there's a little bit of confusion in what is the best policy. There's a confusion in the market about how do we deal with it. And frankly, there's a confusion among agencies on exactly how do we crack this problem. So I think it's timely that we discuss it and resolve this confusion and make this judgment call on how we go forward. So let me just shed a little bit of light on this big program, the big elephant in the room, if you will, this URPCC project. It's a program where we have a lot of sunk cost. We've built 5,000 housing units already. There's 13,000 more under construction. They're about 450 to 550 square foot each. The basic idea is you liberate land that has low-income housing. You put them into dense housing. You liberate the land, sell it, and recover the cost. That's the basic business model. But we've run into a whole host of performance issues related to this, social issues as well. And we have an outstanding government commitment of roughly 40 billion rupees just on the current build-out. There's, of course, in my personal, and this is my personal view, this one-size-fits-all approach has failed in so many countries that we need to really think about, is this what we want to do? Lots of people cite the example of Singapore and say, look, Singapore did it, we can do it. I would again question that thesis. I was in Singapore 2 weeks ago and found out they spend $1.4 billion a year on public housing maintenance, and that's the state paying that. The question is, if we build this mass-scale housing, how do we maintain it? And I think the jury is still out on how we will actually do that in Sri Lanka. And then the cost is also prohibitive. The current estimates are it'll cost 180 billion rupees to rehouse the 68,000 or so, underserved settlements in the city. And the question is, do we need to do all of it? Recovery of cost obviously has been problematic, and we talked about institution capacity to deliver housing on such a mass scale is also a question. But the deeper problem here is this. By doing it, do we deepen social segregation? And do we really want to do that? That's really, to me, the critical question. So I feel you need a paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift has to go in kind of 4 key areas: in planning, management, land, and finance. So let me just quickly go through this. I think when we think through this, I think, talking especially about the low income, we're talking about, 30% to 40% of the city's population. A one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really work. It won't work. So we need to figure out optionalities. We need to densify, but we need to densify to sustainable levels. We need to think seriously about how do we mix socioeconomic groups and diffuse segregation rather than promote it. This concept of the rich people can't look at poor people, I don't buy it personally. And housing should be part of a more multifaceted way that, as far as possible, we do in a kind of community-driven way. We also need to rethink how the government really engages. Does the government really need to be a provider? Or are there situations where you can just be the enabler of this and let market mechanisms or community mechanisms actually go forward and do this? And do this in a way that we avoid these conflicting mandates between agencies, avoid these kind of land disputes over agencies, and get this thing done. We talked about land, not going to spend a lot of time, but basically we need to look at this from a macro perspective and say, how do we allocate land for housing, whether it's middle income, high income, and get basically all classes of people equity stake, basically, in the development of the city. And as another principle in terms of funding, I think we should look for maximum housing and maximum social impact for every rupee the government spends. I think the government should really intervene only in the situations where the market cannot take it, and prioritize where we go in. So in wrapping up, I think a deeper consensus on how we deal with housing is needed. And this is a consensus around the social side of housing. What kind of city do you and I want to live in? That's the question. And I think we need to really deliberate on that and think about that and come up with an answer that may not make everybody happy, but something that we have to deal with. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nayana.
LBR LBO Infrastructure Summit 2016.